And I don't think either of those two would have been able to cope. They'd been anywhere else. And that was the only good thing that happened, was that they were there.
The British royal family has survived wars, abdications, betrayals, scandals, divorces, and public humiliation. But some of the most consequential battles in royal life are never fought in public. They unfold behind closed doors, through inheritance, access, custom, and silence. No one holds a press conference to announce them. No one issues a dramatic statement. Yet the stakes can be enormous, because in a monarchy, property is never just property. It is memory, power, legitimacy, and control disguised as land and stone. That is why Balmoral matters, and that is why Princess Anne matters too. For much of her life, Anne has represented something the modern monarchy struggles to hold on to: discipline without performance. She is not sentimental in public. She is not interested in spectacle. She is not known for feeding gossip, softening rules, or dressing institutional issues in emotional language. She works, she endures, she follows the code. And in the popular imagination, Anne has become almost a symbol of duty itself. The daughter who never wandered too far from the old understanding of monarchy, that it is service first, self second, and family politics somewhere far below both. So when whispers begin about royal property, private access, and the possibility that blurred lines are beginning to form around Balmoral, people naturally turn toward her, because if there is one senior royal who would care less about appearances and more about principles, it would be Anne. Balmoral is not just another royal residence. That distinction matters. It is not Buckingham Palace. It is not Windsor Castle. It is not part of the Crown Estate in the way many people assume. Balmoral is private property, owned personally by the monarch, and passed down through the family. That makes it, in some ways, even more sensitive. The castle and estate sit deep inside royal mythology. It was Queen Victoria's Highland retreat, Queen Elizabeth II's sanctuary, and the place where she died in September 2022. For Anne, that alone gives Balmoral a kind of sacred status. It is bound up with childhood, with summers, with horses, with family, with memory, and ultimately with loss.
I think it's safe to say that change is on my agenda. Change for good. And I embrace that and I enjoy that change. I don't fear it. That's the bit that excites me, is the idea of being able to bring some change.
That emotional dimension changes the tone of any discussion about who gets to use Balmoral, how it is managed, and where its future belongs. For Anne, this is not likely to feel like an ordinary estate question. It touches the deepest symbols of continuity the monarchy has left. King Charles inherited Balmoral as private property after the Queen's death. That legal point is critical, because it means decisions about the estate are not matters of state in the usual sense. They are family decisions, shaped by inheritance law, private ownership, and long-standing royal custom. That is where clarity begins to disappear. Public palaces come with public expectations. Private royal estates live in a grayer world, one governed as much by unwritten rules as by written law. And unwritten rules are exactly where family conflict thrives. Since becoming king, Charles has shown that he is more willing than his mother was to adapt the presentation of royal property. Opening Balmoral for public tours was seen by some as a modernizing move, by others as a commercial one, and by traditionalists as a symbolic break from the instinctive privacy that once surrounded the estate. To Charles, that may be stewardship. To others, it may feel like a shift in philosophy. To Anne, one suspects, the question may not be whether change is possible, but whether the character of the place survives the change. That is the larger atmosphere into which Camilla's family enters. Camilla's children, Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes, occupy an unusual position in royal life. They are connected to the monarchy by proximity, not by role. They have no titles, no official constitutional standing, and no duty-based relationship to the crown. They are private citizens. And yet, because their mother is queen, they exist very close to royal space without being shaped by royal obligation. That creates a category the monarchy has never handled comfortably. People intimate to the sovereign's household, but outside the institution's discipline.
I think it's very important that tradition stays, and tradition has a huge part of all this. But there's also points where you look at tradition and go, is that still fit for purpose today? Is that still the right thing to do? Are we still doing and having the most impact we could be having?
For a long time, that ambiguity could be managed. Charles was Prince of Wales, then king. Camilla rose alongside him. Her children remained largely private. The public did not ask too many questions. But once illness, succession, inheritance, and private estate planning enter the conversation, that ambiguity becomes harder to ignore. The reported transfer of Camilla's private estate, Ray Mill House, to her children added a new layer to that conversation. On paper, it can be interpreted in ordinary ways. It may be inheritance planning, it may be financial housekeeping, it may simply be the practical behavior of a woman arranging her affairs sensibly. All of those explanations are plausible, but within palace circles, even an ordinary property transfer can trigger broader speculation, because it raises the unavoidable question of preparation. Preparation for what? For tax efficiency? For distance? For future independence? For a life in which the current shape of royal status may not remain exactly as it is now? That question becomes more interesting because it intersects with Balmoral. If Camilla is quietly securing her own family's future through private transfers, then where does her family's place in the royal private world begin and end? What is invitation, and what becomes expectation? What is hospitality, and what starts to resemble access? And when access attaches itself to a place like Balmoral, people inside the family may begin to see not comfort, but encroachment. This is where Princess Anne becomes central again. Anne's entire adult life has been built around boundaries. She understands hierarchy, protocol, and obligation in a way that feels almost old-fashioned, even by royal standards. She has never seemed especially impressed by celebrity, by emotional theater, or by the softer reinventions of monarchy that make some modern royals more publicly lovable. Her legitimacy comes from something sterner: repetition, reliability, work. In that worldview, proximity to the crown is not enough. One earns one's place through service, and Camilla's children, whatever their personal merits, do not belong to that world. They have not spent decades carrying public burdens, accepting scrutiny, obeying protocol, or subordinating personal freedom to the institution. That difference may seem merely philosophical from the outside. Inside a royal family, it is everything. For Anne, the issue may not be personal dislike, it may be structural discomfort. The monarchy, in her understanding, is not a loose social circle where the spouses, stepchildren, and in-laws of senior figures drift naturally into shared privilege. It is an institution with lines, duties, and distinctions. If those lines begin to blur around a place like Balmoral, then the problem is not one of personality, it is one of principle. And the principle matters more because Charles's health has turned the future into something immediate. When a monarch is visibly aging and managing serious illness, private estates stop being symbolic future questions and become live issues. Who will inherit what? Who will live where? Who retains access? Who becomes peripheral once the center of royal gravity moves? These are not abstract matters when succession is in sight. They are early-stage power questions, and everyone close to the family knows it. In that sense, Balmoral is not just a castle. It is a preview of the post-Charles monarchy. When William eventually becomes king, the emotional and practical shape of the family will shift. His instincts already appear more controlled, more selective, and more guarded about who should sit close to the institution. Anne, in many ways, seems closer to that mindset than to Camilla's looser family orbit. Not because William and Anne are identical, but because both seem to place enormous value on the distinction between personal ties and institutional legitimacy. That makes Balmoral a point of tension even if no one openly says so. Because the issue is not whether Camilla can invite her children occasionally, or whether Tom and Laura are welcome at family gatherings. The deeper issue is whether repeated familiarity can slowly harden into assumed entitlement. Can a private family pattern become a quasi-royal habit? And if it does, who stops it? Princess Anne is one obvious answer. Not because she has formal authority over Balmoral, she does not. Not because she is likely to wage some melodramatic war behind the scenes. That seems improbable, but because she represents the moral resistance inside the family to the casual expansion of royal privilege. If Anne quietly disapproves, that disapproval carries weight. It may not appear on the front page, it may never be confirmed. But inside palace life, the judgment of someone like Anne can shape atmosphere. And atmosphere shapes decisions more often than outsiders realize. There is also history in the room. Anne and Camilla have known one another for decades, and their social world was complicated long before Camilla became queen. That shared past likely means they understand each other better than the public assumes. It also likely means that any disagreement between them would not be crude or explosive. It would be coded, polite, controlled, perhaps visible only through gestures, through emphasis on rules, through small refusals to let certain assumptions go unchallenged. That is how royal conflict usually works when the players are disciplined, and Anne is disciplined. If she senses that Balmoral is drifting from being a royal sanctuary into something softer, looser, or less clearly bounded, she is unlikely to shout. She is more likely to insist quietly on principle, to treat protocol as a shield, to frame her position not as emotion, but as continuity. That would be entirely in character for her. Anne rarely needs drama to make a point. The point is stronger when it appears to arise from order itself. Meanwhile, the public sees only fragments. A property transfer here, a royal tour there, a comment about slimming down the monarchy, an unspoken discomfort over who belongs inside the innermost family spaces and why. Put together, those fragments reveal something larger. The monarchy is not simply preparing for succession in title, and it is preparing for succession in culture. Charles's reign has always carried the complexity of a blended family at the top of the institution. William's reign may not, and that difference will matter. It will matter for access, for habit, for influence, and for what family means once the monarchy narrows again under a new king. That narrowing is where Anne's instincts become most relevant. She has long seemed to favor a disciplined, duty-bound model of monarchy, smaller, clearer, less vulnerable to ambiguity. In that model, there is less room for people whose connection to royal privilege is real in practice, but undefined in principle. Camilla's children may be perfectly decent, entirely lawful private citizens. That is not the point. The point is that Anne's version of monarchy is unlikely to be comfortable with categories that blur status without requiring service. That is why this story matters. Not because there is some confirmed palace explosion over property, not because Balmoral is visibly at war, but because the arguments that shape monarchies often begin as whispers around land, access, and inheritance. They begin where emotion and institution overlap. They begin in places like Balmoral, places too important to be treated casually, too private to be governed transparently, and too symbolic to remain merely personal. Princess Anne understands that better than most. She understands that castles are not just buildings. Estates are not just land. Invitations are not just invitations. In a royal family, every private arrangement carries public meaning sooner or later. And when the monarchy is already under pressure from illness, scandal, succession anxiety, and generational change, those meanings become harder to contain. So the real question is not whether Anne is furious or whether Camilla's children have gone too far. That is the easy version of the story. The harder, more accurate version is this. The royal family is entering a stage where old assumptions are no longer stable. Private property is becoming a battleground for future identity. And among the senior royals, Princess Anne may be one of the clearest guardians of a boundary. Others are increasingly tempted to blur. If that boundary holds, it will likely hold quietly. If it breaks, the consequences may take years to become visible. But by then, the shape of the monarchy may already have changed, because the quietest disputes in royal life are often the ones that matter longest.